So part 3 of the introduction to theory debate is responding to theory shells. Part 1, we talked about the big picture understanding of what is theory and how does it relate to substantive debate. Part 2, we talked about how to construct a theory shell and to read it against somebody else. And now we're going to talk about how to defend yourself when somebody reads theory. So, the first thing I want you to remember, Jack, is that you are being accused of cheating.
Okay.
Now, cheating might be a harsh word, right? Usually it's not that personal. Usually people aren't like, you're a cheater. It's not cheating, at least in the way that it is in school. If you get caught with answers to a test on your cell phone, and you get caught looking at that cell phone during a test, that's a different type of cheating than if you read a really specific app.
Yeah.
Can you identify what is different about that cheating?
I think cheating in debate isn't necessarily... Well, I think it's different because in school, when you're like looking at the answers, you would be... well, I think it's kind of similar. I think it's mainly different because in debate, you're not doing anything necessarily against like the hard and fast rules. But
good. So the biggest difference is that we've had a understanding when we're taking our tests that we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So you're violating a rule that you knew existed.
Mm-hmm.
However, with debate, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Because those rules are being... So, let me give you an example that seems to be more equivalent to cheating on a test in debate. What if you set your timer for, instead of 6 minutes, 6 minutes and 15 seconds, and you did that on purpose?
Yeah, then that would seem like it would be similar to cheating on a test.
Right, and so the intuitive difference between those two examples is that you were cheating purposefully against a rule that you knew existed when you missed when you didn't mistime your timer. You purposefully made your timer larger than the time you actually had.
Okay. So if you are cheating,
Yeah.
or if you are accused of theory, then is there anything that you would say, like, that would one response to theory just be that you're not cheating or that you meet your opponent's definition of theory or whatever they specify?
Well, let's go through it. Let me give you a systematic way to think about how you should react when somebody accuses you of cheating.
Okay.
So, this should be, you should take notes on what questions should I ask myself when somebody says that I violated a rule that would be good to adopt.
Okay.
So, I think the first question, it should be... Sorry, I'm being awful at my numbering here. Okay, first question should be, did I violate that rule? This is often something that is overlooked in really high-level debates. Make sure that you're actually violating the rule.
Okay.
Did you actually do it?
So what would be a case in which you didn't violate the rule?
Let's say they say you can't specify and defend only the countries you specify.
Yeah.
But let's say you specified Nigeria and were willing to defend disads to Canada and Brazil.
Yeah.
So even though you specified a country, you still meet their rule because you are willing to defend all disads.
Okay. Do some people, depending on how it's worded? Like, if it's worded badly, then you can also determine if you violate the rule or not?
Absolutely. The preciseness of the interpretation is crucial. If it's poorly worded, you need to exploit that. That's their fault.
Okay, what would be the second question?
The second question, which you ask yourself, let's say now we violated the rule.
Yeah.
So the second question I'd ask myself is, why do I think that what I did was okay? Basically, what I'm asking you to do is ask yourself, justify your decision to read what you did.
Okay.
If you can't justify to yourself why you think what you did was okay, you're gonna lose this theory debate.
Yeah.
It's just not gonna work out.
Okay. So, when you're asking yourself this question, would this then be a response on the standards?
Yeah, well, it's not exactly formulated as, oh, I did something okay. We'll talk about how you formulate it at technically on the line by line on the standards, right? Like we're gonna do a lot of work on theory. Theory takes a while to truly teach at a high level. And so we'll talk about how you should word it specifically in the form of a counter interpretation and manipulating standards. But for now, I want you to ask yourself the question: why is it okay for me to do what I did?
Okay.
If you're coming to the conclusion that it's not okay, you probably shouldn't have been doing it.
Yeah. What would be the third question?
The third question is that I would ask myself is, do I want to debate in a world where we adopt my opponent's rule? So don't think about it in this round. Think about it in terms of in future debates. Would you want to debate with this rule? And think about it in terms of all sides of the debate, right? Think about it both in terms of affirming and negating.
Okay. So on a theory debate, you would generally just be comparing the world that your opponent's rule makes, or the world that your rule makes.
Yeah, I mean, presumably the simplest form of your rule would be to not adopt their rule.
Yeah.
Like your rule would just be, what I did is okay, or I can do what I did.
Mhm. Okay. What would be the fourth question?
I think that those three questions are probably a great place to start. I think the following questions would just be responding. There's no other, like, once you answer those questions, then you need to respond to the actual case or the show.
Okay. How would you respond to the shell or whatever?
So, the first thing you need to understand is, again, jargon, unfortunately.
Okay.
You must include a counter interpretation. So, a counter interpretation is a fancy way for saying counter rule.
Okay.
And presumably, your counter rule says it is okay for you to do what you did.
Yeah.
If your counter rule does not say it is okay for you to do what you did, you're not doing it right.
Okay.
So that's really important, right? Because you have to establish that you meet your counter rule. Like if you say, instead of adopting my opponent's rule, let's adopt this one instead, you have to make sure that you are not violating your own rule.
Yeah. So then when for the violation, would you instead just say you meet your
Yeah,
interpretation?
exactly. There is no violation.
Okay.
However, you could say that your opponent violates your counter rule.
Okay, do people usually do that?
It depends. It depends on this thing called offensive counter interpretations. OCIs are the way it's abbreviated in high level debates. And we can talk about that. Not right now. It's just too detailed, and there's a lot of other issues that we need to understand together before we get there. But yeah, people do it both ways. Real quick though, I think you can understand that the method of saying they violate that rule is probably more strategic because that means that they're also cheating then,
Yeah.
right?
So, yeah, on that, you would generate offense off the violation, but if you just said you meet, would you just be generating offense on the standards level?
Well, so you're using offense in two words, right? When you generate offense on the violation, that is in terms of the impact.
Yeah. Okay.
When you generate, in both worlds, you have to generate offense on the standards. Regardless of whether your counter interpretation has a violation or an I meet, you need offense on your counter standards.
Okay. So would the rest of the counter interpretation look the same as the interpretation, or like the regular theory shell?
And so again, this is some jargony stuff. A lot of people say here are reasons to prefer the counter interpretation, or they'll just say reasons to prefer, and then they'll start listing out standards and explaining why those standards are reasons to prefer. So, for example, they'll say the affirmative is allowed to specify the group of adolescents, the type of medical right, and the country in which the AF happens. Here are several reasons to prefer. One is depth. Second is in round or like specific ground or something like that, or whatever. Whatever reasons you think it should be adopted.
Okay. And then on the reasons to prefer, would you also be doing weighing?
Yeah, you would compare your reasons to prefer your standards versus their reasons to prefer their standards.
Okay. What would the weighing look like? You would just be saying that it's more educational.
You'd talk about what's more important to fairness or education.
Yeah. Okay.
So do you see how there's weighing at two different levels here? You're weighing different standards back to a voter, and then you can also weigh voters against each other.
Yeah.
It's the same as in substantive debate. You can weigh two different frameworks against each other. You can also weigh offense and two different contentions against each other.
Yeah. So do sometimes people just weigh the voter and not weigh the standards and just say why their opponent doesn't link to that specific voter?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What would be the part after the reasons to prefer?
Then you go to their, so you don't have to give a counter voter unless you're including standards that they didn't have.
Okay.
Or sorry, if you're including voters that they didn't have.
So sometimes people never, or just don't give the voter?
Yeah, because let's say all of your reasons to prefer your interpretation or counter interpretation are for fairness.
Yeah.
And they've already read a fairness voter.
Yeah.
You don't need to reread the fairness voter.
Yeah. You'd just be wasting time.
Exactly.
Okay.
However, if you're giving reasons to prefer your counter interpretation based on education and all their arguments were fairness based, then yes, now you need to read an education voter.
Okay. So after that, would you then have to give like the justification or the paradigm, like drop the argument or drop the debater?
Well, you can do all of that on their theory shell. Because remember, they spoke first. They've already set this all up.
Okay. So you just respond.
Then you tell the judge, now on their shell.
Okay. Is there any other part of a counter-interpretation?
No, that's it. So, do you see how the bulk, or the meat, so to say, of a theory debate is these standards?
Yeah.
So really, the biggest conversation we need to have, and the hardest part about theory debate, is getting good at the standards debate.
Okay.
And now, remember, when I say standards debate, that can mean different things depending on which level of debate we're talking about. If we're talking about substantive debate, the standards debate would be the framework.
Yeah.
If we're talking about theory debate, the standards debate is the offense.
Okay.
So don't let the jargon confuse you, right? Just learn it once and commit to it. And I know it's frustrating that there is so much jargon, but that's just, I guess, part of the nature of this game.
Yeah. So before you were saying that you need a counterinterp to respond to theory. Is there also any other ways that you can respond to theory?
Good question. So, competing interpretations, the paradigm. Do you remember talking about that a little bit earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah. That paradigm of competing interpretations is reliant on you offering a counter interpretation. I.e., you cannot have competing interpretations if there is not a second interp.
Okay.
Right? So basically, the interpretations are competing against each other for the judge's decision on what is most fair.
Yeah. So if you want to respond to theory in another way, then you would just have to do it through a different paradigm?
Well, the only other paradigm we've established is reasonability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you want to respond to theory using reasonability, I guess technically you may not need competing interpretations.
Okay.
However, if we think about it strategy, it seems to be risky, right? What if you lose competing interps versus reasonability? That would mean you automatically lose the theory debate.
Yeah.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Even if you're making reasonability arguments, still put a counterinterp.
Okay. How do you respond to a theory shell with reasonability?
So let's say your bright line is you have to show that your opponent could have read turns for 7 minutes and that it was predictable, it being your AF.
Yeah. So you just have to establish some sort of bright line?
And then establish that you meet that bright line.
Okay. Do people sometimes not even establish a bright line?
Yeah, and in those cases, unless their opponent is weak, they're usually not going to win the reasonability debate.
Okay.
So let's say you establish a bright line that you need to do X and Y to show you were being fair. Then, instead of having to debate the interp counter interp debate, you could just establish that you are doing X and Y, and that's sufficient.
Yeah.
Cool. So, does the big picture understanding of how to respond to a theory shell make sense?
Yeah.
The one thing I do want to definitely remind you of is that it is important for you to address all of their standards on their shell. And ideally, you address them with a combination of turns and defense.
Okay. So you never just address, 2 of the 3 standards?
Well, you can, but then you've conceded one of them.
Yeah.
So you have conceded then that a reason to prefer their rule would be because of that one of those standards. It makes your life a lot harder.
So the turns and everything is basically the same as substantive debate?
Yeah, I mean, we will go through very in-depth all of the standards and how to construct link turns, etc.
Yeah. Do people ever impact turn standards?
Yeah, people will say being unpredictable is actually a good thing, not a bad thing.
Okay.
People will also impact turn the voter. They'll say being unfair is good.
Hmm.
Or they'll say fairness is an oppressive concept.
Can you impact turn both the standards and the voter?
Probably.
Yeah.
But it seems like the impact turn at the standards would just link into the voter.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. It seems like the impact turn on the voter operates on a level higher.
Okay. What are the main standards? Are there any main standards that people use?
I
Or
would
do people
say
just... Yeah.
the biggest. Well, let's talk about that. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's end this conversation right here. For on responding to theory shells. Do you have any questions about that?
No, I think right now everything's pretty clear.